Steve Cropley and I started talking about the concept of having this evening about 9 months ago. And our fear was that everyone would say, what do you want to talk about electric vehicles? I think the proof is that you're here this evening, so absolutely fantastic. I'm not going to say much more until the end, but when you think about this place, it's always been linked with technological innovation. And I think we're going to extend that this evening and talk a little bit more about the future. So without further ado, will you please welcome Steve Cropley.
So I would like to invite two experts, Tom Callow, the Director of Comms and Strategy for Chargemaster, the biggest provider of charging points in Europe, to join us, and also Ben Fletcher, who is Renault's electric car specialist for the UK. Both of these guys together know everything. So we're going to get stuck in. The way we're going to attack this is that we've got, first of all, we have a little bit of a Renault video to show you, and then which Ben has brought, and then Tom has quite a fascinating presentation, which I've already seen, which I think will answer a lot of the primary questions, but we're going to try and get through the presentation side of it, because the thing that we have learned from events like this, particularly to do with electric cars, is that the Q&A is the most important bit. And these are the guys that are well and truly equipped for the Q&A. So first of all, what's our chance of running the Renault video? Aren't they great computers? Do you enjoy them? Hop.
We can show you how we see the future of zero-emission vehicles. Great. I'm going to invite Tom to take us through his presentation, which I have, as I say, I've seen and have found fascinating, or at least read and have found fascinating. But before we do that, I'm going to invite each of these gentlemen just to say what they do and what their connection is with the electric car market in the UK, which is, despite anything you've read, is going like a rocket and will do much better. Do you want to start, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, first of all, very much for inviting me here. It is actually, I know everybody who sits here probably says it is a genuine honour. It really is a genuine honour and a real pleasure, not least because actually on company time, I've finally been able to see the Wellington that I saw being winched out of Loch Ness when I was about 8. So this is absolutely dream come true stuff. And then meeting so many of you this evening has been a real cherry on the top of that cake. And I do mean that heartfelt. So my name's Ben Fletcher. I'm head of the electric vehicle programme in the UK for Renault. Renault, as that little, hopefully not overly corporately video showed, is a real leader when it comes to electric vehicles. There are lots of manufacturers out there who talk about electric vehicles as something coming for the future, something which they're going to be launching over the next few years, which is really gathering pace. As you've seen there, we've been in that market now since 2009. We've got a range of 4 different vehicles, so that includes vans as well as the Zoe that you've seen outside. And in my position as head of EV, I get involved in all the different parts around an electric vehicle. So it isn't just a question of talking about the car, it's a question of talking about the infrastructure, which is where Tom will be talking about. It's a question of talking about government policy around how they're going to encourage people. But chiefly, it's a question of talking to people like you and actually showing you what the car is actually capable of, explaining how it can fit into people's lives, what it's good for, what still needs a bit of work. We all need to be realistic about that, but really that's the thing that gets me out of bed every morning, is actually the ability to go out there and talk about the cars and explain what they can do.
Tom?
I'm not going to repeat Ben's words exactly, but again, it's a real privilege to be here. So thank you very much for inviting me, and thanks to Steve as well. You've got a superb compere in Steve. He's one of the sort of friendliest people in our industry, but also one of the ones who knows the most about everything, I find. So you've got a really good host in that sense. I started in sort of the EV space really about sort of 15 years ago in some ways, and I look about 12, but 15 years ago, when I sort of, I've always loved cars, and I, looked at the kind of cars I wanted, and I kind of came to this conclusion that actually I might not be able to drive the kind of cars I would want to drive forever, because there's finite resources in the world, and if I did, I might be the one paying a high price in 2040 or whatever for petrol for a V8 Morgan that I ideally want. I came to the conclusion that something had to give. So I started looking at kind of cleaner vehicles, et cetera, and got into sort of researching EVs and hybrids and things like that, and became a general sort of nerd, really. The core reason I think, and I'll now say it in the slides, is that we have these legally binding targets now to meet to reduce our emissions, and they're not targets that have been set by politicians for the sake of it. They're targets that have been set by really smart scientists who know a lot more than I do about the environment, and who say that's what we need to do to have the best chance of extending our short existence on this planet if we want to sustain it. So that's sort of why I got involved. A bit of context about sort of my driving. I do about 35,000 miles a year on electric. Bizarrely, my wife does about 5,000 miles a year on a petrol, so we've kind of got the wrong scenario going there for most people, but she can certainly switch to electric, but I do 35,000 electric miles a year. I've done 11,000 miles in Ben's fine product, Zoe. Fantastic car. I currently drive a BMW i3, but I've driven pretty much every other EV you can think of, except that Zoe Racer thing, which I'd love a go in, Ben, and the Hyundai that Robin kindly bought tonight, which is brand new on the market, and I'd love a go, Robin. But they're fascinating to me. I love the performance, I love the kind of what they do. Just talk about both of you, just very briefly. Just talk about the driving characteristics. I think what we have, everybody in this room is a lover of cars, and one of the things that I would like to get across is the fact that these are not milk floats. Yeah. Just talk about driving them.
So, shall I go first?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Again, much like Tom, I suppose I've done 40,000 miles now over the last few years in various different models of Renault Zoe. I haven't quite got the same breadth of experience as Tom can boast. But the things that you always hear about with electric vehicles are the torque. So those of you who went out in the vehicles today will have seen how instantly they respond, but also actually in the smoothness and the quietness of those cars. And while those sound like sort of marketing kind of words, actually they're really, really important from a day-to-day basis for the kind of driving that we all do. People like Steve do an absolutely fantastic job of showing how cars can be used, going to some amazing places with them, showing some incredible roads with those cars. But actually, for most of us, day-to-day driving is going to involve traffic, is going to involve relatively slow speeds, is going to involve speed bumps, all of those kinds of things. And it's that kind of driving where an EV really comes into its own, because it removes a lot of the stress, it removes a lot of the hassle. It's just a get in and go. So most of the cars on the market, and certainly the three outside, can preheat themselves, for example, before you get into them. So just imagine that. In the winter, you're not having to scrape the ice off your car. The car is already warm before you get into it. So there are little things like that that not only in the driving experience, but also in the ownership experience, really do give people things that they haven't had before, but genuinely useful things that they haven't had before.
Yeah, and I think actually,
You're a bit of a keen wheelman, aren't you?
Well, I don't know, you've obviously seen me driving, Steve. I think that the one stat I'll leave you with from a performance perspective, and it's about the BMW i3, and I'm pretty sure this is right, is that the BMW i3 is the fastest accelerating BMW to 30 of any BMW.
Quicker than an M3 or
Quicker than M3, quicker than M6. If I am on on a traffic light with you in my i3 and you've got any BMW car, I will beat you to 30. You might beat me to 60, but I'll beat you to 30. Now, the relevance to that for me is, you know, Steve and his colleagues, obviously, in the magazines, they always talk to 0 to 60. Think about the last time you did 0 to 60. You do 40 to 60 a lot. You do 40 to 70, 30 to 80, whatever you do. The last time, I genuinely can't remember the last time I did 0 to 60, okay? I do 0 to 30 all the time, and I'm sure you do. So actually 0 to 30 is a far more realistic stat. So one thing I always sort of cheekily campaign for is actually I think one thing that would, you know, dramatically change perceptions of EVs if they are still negative is actually just scrap all the 0 to 60 times, make them 0 to 30s, and then all the internal combustion engine cars would look rubbish.
The other thing that I always find is that electric cars, the thing that is, as well as the serenity, as well as the smoothness, you get this accuracy, don't you? You get exactly what you ask for through the controls. You don't, and suddenly it dawns on you that everything else you drive depends on ingesting a column of gas, which is suddenly a very imprecise thing. It's almost surgically precise, isn't it, what you ask for?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you don't get turbo lag. You don't take turbo lag in most cars now, but you don't get any kind of resistance in that sense.
No.
And actually, one of the things we haven't sort of mentioned, I suppose, or I didn't mention, was, you know, the fact that actually the recuperation aspect is actually quite satisfying. And I know that, again, sounds a bit nerdy, but when you're driving and you're able to actually recuperate power you've lost, it's really satisfying.
It becomes immoral to brakes, doesn't it? Because you can just come off the gas and gather energy as you slow.
There's a really great bit of there's a great bit of road between down in Surrey on the way to Goodwood. And I remember doing it once. It's a 20-mile stretch of road on sort of B roads down through, on sort of way to sort of Pulborough and that kind of area. And it's a 20-mile stretch of road. And I remember going in my i3 once, and I used 8 miles of range to do a 20-mile stretch of road. So I got back 12 miles through the the hills and stuff. So they're fascinating.
Okay, let's tack your presentation. We're going to pause as we go to ask questions, if it will make remarks and so on. The way this is going to work, incidentally, is that Tom's going to steer us through this, but at the end you're going to get a long time to ask questions if you have any. I hope that you've already had quite a few questions answered, but the thing that we did find was that there were some overhanging. Let's start. I've got a copy of the presentation here, and very encouragingly it starts off by what is an EV and what's not an EV. So this is good. We're starting from the ground floor, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, so firstly, apologies. You're not going to miss much in the information bit that's on the top left there, blocking it. And I've got a wonderful assistant, not Alexa, if you've got one of those, but it's called Lawrence over there. So thank you, Lawrence, for switching slides for me. So if you just feel that a couple more clicks and okay, so an electric vehicle. And this is a bit of an subjective thing for me, but other people disagree. We see an electric vehicle as one you can charge externally. So I personally don't look at a standard hybrid like a Prius and say it's an electric vehicle. You have to fill it with fuel. You have to drive using petrol. You can get a bit of energy back while you're driving, but it's impossible to drive it on any other fuel than petrol. An electric vehicle, whether that's a plug-in hybrid and a full EV I'll talk about in a second, you can drive some distance, either anything between maybe 20 or 30 miles up to 300 miles on electric only without using any petrol. So that's our definition. You've got a pure electric car, which only drives on electric. Next one, Lawrence. You've got a plug-in hybrid. And I think all the cars outside today were pure electrics, I think, weren't they? So Renault Zoe, Nissan Leaf, etc. Now, a plug-in hybrid is effectively a bit like the Prius you might have been in, but effectively with a little bit more electric power. So the two systems work in parallel. So you can either be driving on electric or petrol, or a mixture of both for maybe more performance. And then the final one, Lawrence, is a range extender. Now, these are my BMW i3 is an example of this, but these haven't really been exploited, in my view, by the car manufacturers as much as they can be. So the principle is basically you put a much larger battery on the car, so you get a car that can do maybe 80, 100 more miles of range, and then you have a tiny engine that acts as just a generator to generate basic electricity that then powers the motor that then drives the car. So it's a fail-safe. It's a nice backup if you are worried about range. And the i3 has a range extender version. There was a very earlier EV, Vauxhall Ampera, which was sold in America as a Chevy Volt. And those I think have a bit more mileage in them, forgive the pun, in terms of what OEMs might want to do. But that's the sort of definitional slide I've got.
Can I just, one swift question, because I meant to ask Ben this while we were outside. Why does Renault not do range extenders and hybrid cars?
Very good question, and one that we get asked fairly frequently. The simple answer for us is it comes down to efficiency. So that can be efficiency in use, and it can be efficiency when you buy the vehicle. So these ones, and this is a slide I absolutely love because there's a lot of confusion in the market about what an electric vehicle is. But for plug-in hybrids, for example, if you imagine when you're buying that vehicle, you're not just buying an electric vehicle with a motor and a battery, you're also buying an internal combustion vehicle. So you're buying two powertrains in the same one. So if we want to try and accelerate the rollout of low-emission vehicles out to the public, actually that's just raising the cost of entry for lots of people. The other thing is that for a lot of people with a plug-in hybrid or that kind of thing, for a lot of people that will work for them, but you have to have a specific sort of usage case for it. You have to use the vehicle in a sort of specific way. And if you don't use the vehicle in the specific way, you end up not with the best of both worlds, but you end up actually compromising both things. So you end up with a largish vehicle with a fairly small battery, because obviously it has to fit in next to a fuel tank and everything else. So actually your electric range is fairly poor. On top of that, when you're then out on the motorway, and so you're using that range, you've then got a relatively small engine, which has, you know, it's small because then that way that keeps the headline CO2 down, but that's also taking a battery along with it, which it's also possibly trying to charge. So actually it's then not acting particularly efficiently in that way either.
So you guys are betting on batteries getting better and ranges extending, cars getting lighter?
Our view at Renault is that we will apply the technology in the most useful segments for it. So with what we know about internal combustion engine and what we know about EVs, from having electric vehicles on the range for quite a while now, actually we can combine those two together. So in the future, you know, I can't say never with these things. In the future, you might well see hybrid Renaults or plug-in hybrid Renaults, but they will be put into the sectors where we believe they will do the most good, but also in using everything we know from our expertise in both areas.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I mean, if we can all sort of safely assume electricity is going to be around forever, and I really hope so, given that we can generate it from stuff like the sun, and if we haven't got a sun, we're in bigger problems, right? So the top one there, you know, pure electric cars, therefore, are a long-term answer in the sense that if you've already got electricity, if you've always got electricity, then you can always power an electric car, pure electric car. But if you haven't got petrol eventually, and it's longer term here, but you know, stuff like these at the bottom are perhaps less efficient. And particularly, as Ben says, you know, plug-in hybrid is, if it's used properly, a plug-in hybrid can be great. If you do low mileage, short journeys, you know, my wife does a 10-mile each way commute every day, very, very regular journey patterns, you know, 20 miles a day, perfect for a plug-in hybrid, perfect for an EV, by the way, as well, but she could use a plug-in hybrid almost like an EV. The challenge we get is a lot of people like company car drivers, and I mean, I used to drive 40,000 miles on a diesel A6. People say, oh, I've been a company car driver, I can't rely on these EVs, I need a plug-in hybrid. Wrong. You know, if you're doing 40,000 miles doing a plug-in hybrid, what you end up doing is you end up driving a very inefficient petrol car. There's a petrol car with 100 kilos of batteries underneath. So it's like two humans in the boot, basically. So it's not a good idea to do very high mileage in a plug-in hybrid. It generally will not work for you. And again, perversely, for reasons we won't go into tonight, you know, the middle ones can't rapid charge usually either, which means that the top ones you can charge, let's say, you can get 30 miles in 15 minutes at the moment, on you know, quicker soon. The bottom ones, again, the middle ones, for 30 miles of range, it's like 4.5 hours of charge. I mean, it's not a great way to, if you do short journeys, it's fine.
Okay, let's crack on.
So yeah, so next one, Lawrence, and we'll skip through some of these completely actually. This is quite useful. So this is this is like a presentation with graphs and stuff. I wasn't expecting that's what we do this tonight, but you know, this is just showing you how EVs have taken off in the UK, and this is our definition of EVs. This is a plug-in car in the UK. So you know, you barely had any sort of as little as sort of 8 to 9 years ago, and they've grown significantly. So that the grey line there you can see is cumulative on the right-hand axis here, and then the left axis is the blue bars, which is annual sales. So annual sales are growing year on year, which is a good sign. We're going to hit about 60,000 this year in terms of registrations. We thought we'd be at 70,000 at the beginning of the year. And the biggest reason for that, I'm afraid, is supply. There's easily, in our view, a market for 100,000 electric vehicles in the UK this year. The only reason we won't sell 100,000 this year is because we can't get our hands on them fast enough. And if you ever hear someone say, the UK's not doing very well with electric car sales, people don't want them, go and try and buy one. The waiting lists are significant. And I'm not trying to have a go at Ben and Robin there. It's great. Their products are popular. So the waiting lists are significant.
Is that to do with right-handedness? Does that mean that... No, it's just...
The waiting lists are long because, for several reasons. One is battery supply. So at the moment, you know, there's a ramp up going on worldwide on battery supply. So once OEMs have a if you like a more flowing pipeline, because you don't want to make too many batteries and have them sat around doing nothing. So it's about making the right number for the cars. And I think bluntly, I think that the electric vehicle market's taken off quicker than most OEMs expected, maybe 5 years ago in their planning, because OEMs don't react year to year. These are 5-10-year product plans. Also things like, and I hate to say the word, I'm sorry I'm the first one mentioning it, but Brexit. I'm afraid that the pound has devalued 19-20% since the referendum. That means some manufacturers simply can't afford to sell the car here, because if they brought it here, it would cost too much, and we'd all say, well, that's too premium, it's too much money. But if they didn't sell it for that price, they'd be losing money. So we can't expect them to lose money. So that has an impact. And just general supply issues. So I think that's holding it back slightly. But it's a positive story. It's growing year on year. And that's all to say about that, really. So if we
hang on, there's one thing, if I may, I may also add in there. The other thing that's interesting about that previous, thank you. Yeah. The other thing that's quite interesting is, I think everybody in this room would recognise hybrids. Everybody knows the Prius, that kind of thing. One of the things that's quite interesting to do is to overlay Prius or hybrid sales, all the hybrids, over the same kind of timeline. So if you take the first year as the first year they came on sale, and what you tend to find is that actually over the same kind of timeline, while a lot of the stuff that you hear is, EVs are not taking off or EV sales aren't where they need to be, actually you see that this line is probably it's at least double where hybrids would have been on the same part of their life cycle. So it is a technology which is really taking off very, very quickly.
Yeah. Interesting. So we'll skip the next one, Lawrence. Skip the next one. Sorry, I'm conscious of time. You can ask me about any of this at the end. So what do they cost? One of the misperceptions we have, we run a showroom up in Milton Keynes, actually, for electric cars. You can't buy one there, you just learn about electric cars.
We is Chargemaster. And you sell all brands,
sorry,
don't you?
So
it's actually a really interesting place to go. Filthy commercial considerations aside, there are what,
eight different
6
cars.
or 8 different,
I mean, I won't lie. It's basically funded by government sort of campaign type projects through the Milton Keynes Council, but it's a very good centre to use. But one of the big key things we have in there is consumers coming in every day asking about electric cars, and the perception is they cost £30,000-40,000. You can buy very good used electric cars, scan Auto Trader, scan Motors.co.uk, whatever you want, for £4,000 or £5,000. You can buy Renault Zoes for about that price. You can buy Nissan Leafs. You can be doing, if you're someone that maybe does 5,000 miles a year, you can basically buy a car. If you're spending money on fuel and doing that, you can make your money back on the car in a few years just in fuel savings. So you can buy them for about £5,000. So if we go down a few, Lawrence, just put maybe 3 or 4 more points up. So one thing is, all the manufacturers agreed that they'll be cheaper to make than internal combustion engine cars within maybe the next sort of 5 to 8 years. So at the moment, there is a premium on the price, and again, that's for reasons of pure economies of scale. If you're selling a smaller number of items, you can't get the price down as much, but the prices will come down with economies of scale. But they'll also come down because they're physically easier to make. Most of us probably played with an electric car when we were younger. It had a little remote control. That was an electric car. It's battery, it's a motor, it's some wheels. I'm oversimplifying here. But that's an electric car. They're simpler to make.
Fewer moving parts.
Fewer money, fewer moving parts.
And a lot less mechanical precision.
Yeah, and the battery price is tumbling down. So battery price has been falling about 15%, 20% year on year for the last 10 years. So they're going to be cheaper to make. And I always say that the fair comparison, when you're looking at electric car prices, most people don't buy a car outright anywhere in the UK when it's new. They finance it in some way. They get it on a PCP, a PCH, a personal contract hire or personal contract purchase. And for that purpose, I look at the monthly payments. So again, I'm not going to bore you with sort of stats and finance stuff, but if you look at the monthly payments and consider about £100 fuel saving, then they actually work out cheaper in many cases.
£100 a month.
£100 a month fuel saving, I think, for a pure electric car, yeah. So if you ping another point, Lawrence, it might come up. Oh no, this is all right. My slides don't work properly, don't worry. But basically, my contention is if you do 10,000 miles a year in an internal combustion engine car, fairly efficient, it will probably cost you about 125 quid a month. If you do 10,000 miles a year in a pure EV, it probably costs you about 25 quid a month in electricity. So every month you're pocketing 100 quid. So even if the PCP is 50 quid higher, you're walking away every month with a saving.
Does that align with what you think?
It's absolutely aligned with where we are. In fact, our finance is nicely aligned in that kind of way. The other point on top of all of that is it's not just about the fuel savings; it's also about maintenance savings. There are, exactly as Tom has said, fewer moving parts, so there's less to go wrong. The way that the vehicles are driven generally means that there's less wear on things like tyres. Because of regenerative braking, things like brake pads, brake discs, all that sort of stuff lasts for longer. When you're servicing it, you're not filling it with oil. So there are all of these kind of additional benefits on top of that that help to put much more money into people's pockets.
Does that sell the cars? Do you find it?
It absolutely
What sells
does.
the cars?
The number one reason that people buy the cars is because it saves them money. Absolutely. You know, there might be secondary reasons which are about looking after the environment, might be about noise, all that sort of thing. But what tends to happen is that people come to us because they're really interested in the cost savings. After that, they drive the car and they fall in love with the driving experience as well. Generally, when people buy something because it's going to save them money, or consider something because it's going to save them money, generally they will expect it to not be quite as good as the alternatives. Actually, what they find with an electric vehicle is that it's going to save them money, but it's actually going to be a nicer thing to live with than the alternatives as well. So it ends up being a win in every way.
One impression that I keep hearing from people who sell Leafs in particular is that people buy a Leaf to be the second car and it becomes the first. And the estate car that they had, you know, to take the dogs out and all the rest of it, suddenly, you know, goes down to 20% of the mileage it used to do, and it only gets used to go to Edinburgh to visit Granny twice a year.
Yeah, and there was a lovely anecdote that a guy told me at a motor show where he came up and he bought a Zoe in exactly the same kind of way. And he was saying that his problem was that he now didn't use his diesel BMW frequently enough. And so now every time he went to that, the battery was flat. So actually, of his two cars, the one he had a problem with was the internal combustion.
That's a great, I'm going to use that anecdote.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Well, we're going to skip this slide, but this is just basically saying there are government grants available, and I'm not trying to skip that for a reason. So, sorry, they shouldn't. I should have formatted these slides properly. I apologise. So, maybe, next press, Lawrence. Okay, cool. Are there any company car drivers in the room? Okay, okay. Basically, if you do about 3 or 4 more clicks, I'll just show you something. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. 1 more, and again, and again. There we go, stop. Right. So basically what this shows is, this is my pledge to government, right? So if you're not a company car driver, you can ignore this. If you're a company car driver, the tax situation for electric cars at the moment is good. It's positive, you save money. It is increasing over the next couple of years, and in 2019-20, that's that peak. So if you're in finance year 19-20, that's the peak, 16%, and that applies to anything with a plug currently, okay? So that's slightly bizarre. So if you drive a pure electric car and you're just doing pure electric miles, that's your tax. If you drive a plug-in hybrid and never charge it, that's your tax. So what they're going to do is they're going to go, right, well, what's the range of the vehicle? And they're going to do a much more sort of matrix approach on the right-hand side here. The biggest thing I have a problem with is that the company car tax, BIK on a company car, a pure electric company car, so you're not polluting anything out of the tailpipe, is 16% in 1920, and then the year after that it drops to 2%. So if you're a manufacturer bringing out a car in 1920, and there's quite a lot of new exciting electric cars coming out in 1920, who's going to buy them as a company car if they can save 14% in tax next year? They're going to just defer the purchase. So there's an issue there that's my bugbear with government. Anyway, next one, Lauren, sorry.
You didn't ask if there's anybody from the government in here.
I don't care. No, if there's someone from the government, that's good.
Keep your head down, government.
Yeah, keep your head down. No, government's doing a good job on EVs generally. So these are just some examples. Basically, we get asked frequently, so how many of these cars are coming? You know, are they coming in any kind of high numbers, etc., and if so, how? So we basically took all publicly announced EVs, okay? So this isn't us going like this and going, we think they might be 50 EVs this time. This is us taking all publicly announced electric vehicles from brand OEMs that have said they're going to produce a certain number by a certain year, or even specific models in most cases. And we just did an analysis of, okay, when have they said they're going to come to market? And we've kind of bracketed that. So next 3 years, over 100 models already announced for Europe. And this isn't counting all the stuff that the Chinese market's launching just in China, all that kind of stuff, which would be hundreds. This is just Europe. So 100 models in, and we're going to get most of them, obviously, in the next 3 years. And if you extend that out to 5 years, you add on another 50 easily, if not another 100 models. Key things I just want to pull out from this. Most of them are pure electric. Now, it kind of comes back to Ben's point. Everyone's realizing this is a much more efficient way to design cars and make cars. So Ian Callow, chief designer at Jaguar Land Rover and one of our customers, has said, and this is slightly hyperbolic, but he has said the internal combustion engine is dead. Ian Callow is one of the most respected car designers in the world, and he said the internal combustion engine is dead in his view, because he's designed a pure EV now, and he's gone, this is brilliant. I love designing pure electric cars. So it will carry on the internal combustion engine's not dead today, but I think Ian Callow certainly sees the future. So pure electric is definitely the way forward. Very few plug-in hybrids being announced. And the reason is they're going to be a bridge technology, okay? They're going to be the way to get to pure EV for some people, but most people are just going to skip.
The bridge gets shorter, doesn't it?
It's so short. I mean, I don't think, you know, as I say, 100, 150 models, there might be 10 or 20 plug-in hybrids in there. You know, most are pure electric because they're realizing that's the way. And they're all, you know, these are the pure electric models on here. You're talking about a range of 200, 300, 400 miles. It's not going to be an issue. So next one, Lawrence. So everyone, and then obviously my world is charging. So Chargemaster does every kind of type of charging, really. So the first two here and the last ones. So most charging currently today of electric vehicles, and as that first slide showed, you know, there's 170,000 electric cars on UK roads already, and you know, I'm always stunned at the number I see when I drive about now. It's, you know, 5 years ago you sort of had struggled to pick them out, and you saw an i3 and got really excited. Now they're kind of everywhere. But you know, as was then, and it's true now, the majority of charging happens at home. And the analogy I always use, and my company's been bought by BP recently, so this is a slightly dodgy line, is if you had a petrol tap at home, you'd probably use the petrol tap to fill your car, particularly if it was cheaper than to go to somewhere that sold petrol. It's just simple consumer behavior. If you can do it at home, why would you go somewhere else? You know, the fact that you can charge your phone at Starbucks, let's say down the road in High Street, you charge your phone, you don't go to Starbucks to charge your phone if you can charge it at home. It's the same principle. So the majority of charging is always going to happen at home. Workplaces are really important because, again, you know, the good thing that EVs capitalize on is the fact that most cars are parked for most of the time. And that's a really depressing stat if you work in the car industry making these amazing cars that go around corners at 90 miles an hour. But they basically spend their lives doing nothing. And that's, you know, that's a function of their lives. So, you know, if you can capitalize on that parked time, which is sort of at home, at work, etc., then it kind of makes everything else a lot easier. So workplace is really important. And in public charging, and these are sort of our definitions really, is you either got sort of destination charging where you're going to be parked anyway for maybe an hour or two, like tonight, for example. We're going to sort you out with a charger, Steve, don't worry. Or a rapid charger, which is the much faster rate of charge, and it's this sort of 80% in 30 minutes thing that you hear, for example.
Can you, sorry to interrupt, but at some stage, can either of you gentlemen give us a quick burst on rapid, fast?
Yeah, that's going to be in here, actually. I'll show you. So, or sort of. So those are the kind of types of chargers. So the mindset shift is that most of you, you know, who would drive an electric car, and I say this is someone that does 35,000 miles a year in one, will not actually need to charge on the public network all that much, potentially. So whereas you have to do all of your petrol and all of your diesel filling at a forecourt, the minority will be at a forecourt or some other location in public. And that is a mindset shift. It's really hard. Unless you try one and drive one, you kind of don't necessarily get it. But it's just the way they're used. You know, you won't need as much public charging as you think. So we'll skip forward if that's okay, Ben.
I'd also just add something on there as, you know, effectively a customer, is that actually what you find is that while your car is charging, you are generally doing something else.
You're not waiting. This is everyone says, oh, you drive 35,000 miles a year. How much time do you just sit there looking at your car going, oh, please charge? You know, I'm never doing that. I'm doing work, I'm at the shops. You know, it's maximising other time.
There's another sort of famous quote from, I think it was Robert Llewellyn who first came up with it. But somebody asked him how long it takes to charge his car, and his answer was about 30 seconds. Yeah. And the person was sort of looking a bit mystified, and he said, well, I plug it in, and it takes me about 30 seconds. After that, I go into the house, and I do something else. So I have no idea how long the car takes to charge, but I know it takes me about 30 seconds of my time. But in any of these situations here, you know, when you're at home, you're not generally standing outside just looking at the car in the garage, well, unless you're me. You know that. At work, I'm generally paid not to stand there looking at a car charging, so the car's doing something while I'm doing something else. Destination, again, you know, this is about going to the shops you would normally go to, or going to the shopping centre you would normally go to, and just plugging your car in when you get there. So just helping with that. Again, rapid chargers. Generally, when people undertake a long journey, they will stop on the way. You know, I drove to Devon last weekend. We stopped a couple of times just because we wanted something to eat and we wanted the loo, that sort of thing. So actually, we were actually in a rented Hyundai, but actually the point was that if we had been in an electric vehicle, it wouldn't have held us up. It wouldn't have meant a change in what we were doing. But as Tom says, it's just about that mindset.
But your point, you're making the same point, which is that you have to feel it to understand it. Yeah. You have to live with it to understand it.
And it's great that you've had the cars here tonight, because and that's what we have at the Experience Centre up in Milton Keynes. We find that if someone says, well, how do I get my head around all this EV stuff? You know, you can sit here, you can listen to me, you can listen to Ben, you can listen to Steve. The best thing to do is go and drive one. Go and try one, get a test drive, take one for a weekend. Whatever you can do, try an electric car. Because and this is, very, very few people who have had an EV as a car, for a private car or a company car, go back. And there's a reason. If they were bad and they didn't work, all those people would now be switching back to diesel or petrol. They don't. They carry on. And we're not all kind of mad crusaders that sort of, will sort of eke out every mile of range. We're just practical drivers. And I think the fact that very few people have ever gone backwards from having an EV is a very good selling point, basically.
Really good one here.
Yeah, sorry. So next one, Lawrence. So I'm conscious of time. I don't want to hold you guys up. So I don't actually know what this slide is because I can't see the title. Just one more press?
Sorry,
Should really learn this,
how
shouldn't
many
I?
charging points?
Something like that. I see what, Steve, can I borrow your... This is going to be way easier if I do this. If we go one more press... I don't know why it's not loading. Oh, let's not worry about that. Let's skip through that. Don't need to know about who pays for them. We pay for them mainly. But on a serious note, so the key thing I'd say from that is that everyone again assumes that, that charging points are going to be really expensive and, the government's going to have to invest sort of £1 trillion in public charging. All of the public charging infrastructure that's being deployed today, basically, is being put down with private capital. The government doesn't need to get involved. It's kind of got to where, the early fuel market was in petrol and diesel, where, petrol, not diesel, because it didn't come until later, but the early petroleum market, where the private companies kind of realised how to sell petroleum and they just went about it. The government didn't have to start deploying petroleum. It wasn't that big a deal. So that's who's funding public charging at the moment. So what do charging points look like? Obviously, I'm biased, so these are our ones. But this is kind of roughly what charging points look like. So this is the kind of thing you'll come across. The top left ones there are small kind of rugby ball shaped sort of units that stand on your wall. So we'll fix that to the outside of your house or inside of your garage or wherever it can conveniently go. They're fully waterproof, so you can put it outside. Everyone says, "Oh, can I put a charging point outside? It's electric. It might sort of touch the rain and blow up." No, they're fine. They're all waterproof, etc. So that you can charge at your house very conveniently. You might come across sort of posts like this one in the middle in a car park situation, something like that, and the rapid charger on the right there, which looks a bit like a fuel pump, really. So you've just got a choice of chargers. One thing I would just say on these, there is a socket. Doesn't matter that you don't know what it's called, but it's called a Type 2 socket, which is basically the USB plug of EV charging. So again, people are like, oh, well, the EV thing will never take off because there's a multitude of connectors. Absolute garbage. There's one type of connector, it's called Type 2, and that's the standard for most types of charging. It's just like a USB plug. So whether you have whatever brand of mobile phone you have, you can plug into a USB port. Whatever brand of EV you have, you can plug into a Type 2 socket, which is all those black round sockets on those things.
Is that the case for yours?
Yep. All of them.
Absolutely.
And the only one that's different, the only case that's different is on rapid charging, because at the moment there's a few different types of rapid charging. So on the right there, the keen-eyed among you will have seen there's 3 different connectors. When you go to a petrol station, there's also about 3 different connectors, because there's different types of car. So rapid charging is no different to going out to a petrol pump and knowing that you need the green cable or the black pump or the LPG. You just need to know which connector you need. And the good thing about this stuff is that you can't miss fuel, because it's basically like one of those kids' toys you have with the shape sorters where you put triangles and triangle-shaped stuff. You put that shape one in that shape connector and you can't go wrong. So that's easy. Next slide. So this, at the top it says, what's a kilowatt? So you might have heard the term kilowatt, kilowatt hours, and I forgive if I'm teaching many of you to suck eggs if you know what this stuff is, but I just thought it's important to cover this off. So you might hear kilowatt, kilowatt hour. So kilowatt is a measure of power. It's not a measure of, it's not an amount. Think of it as a time slice. So at one point, a kilowatt is what's being delivered right now at this very second. So that might be coming from a motor, it might be coming from the charge point, but it's what's being delivered at this very second is as a rate. So it's a rate of power. A kilowatt hour is the summation of that power. So a kilowatt hour is an amount that you could hold if you were some sort of weird electrical device. And that equates usually to a battery size. So very simply, you work out charging time by dividing the number of kilowatt hours that you either want or that your battery can hold, et cetera, by the charging rate. So if you have a 70 kilowatt hour battery and you're using a 7 kilowatt charging point, you go 70 divided by 7, and I hope you all know that's 10. So it's not hard to work out charging times. It's a lot easier than working out how much fuel you need when I'm sat there going, oh, 50 miles per hour, side of the motorway going, how I need to drive to Leeds, 57, and your pump's gone at that point, you've gone past it. So it's much easier to work out that. The sort of new miles per gallon is miles per kilowatt hour. So all the cars that you'll be driving, electric cars, will display miles per kilowatt hour. And again, this is way easier than MPG to work out because we buy fuel in litres, but then we're expected to do miles per gallon. So we will have to remember 5.54 in our heads. So miles per kilowatt hour is really easy because you simply, if you know how many kilowatt hours of charge you've just got out of a charge point, or you know how many kilowatt hours your battery holds, you just multiply that by the number that's showing on the screen and you get your range. It's dead easy. And then the calculation of range is just your battery divided by that. So that's some metrics for you. So public charging points, because this is the big debate around EV charging, even though most of you are going to do it most of the time at home. Public charging points are growing, and they're keeping pace with the market. So they're basically growing at the same rate as the EV park in terms of percentages. So as an example, the number of rapid chargers we had on our network expanded 50% in the last 12 months, exactly the same pace as the EV car market, which expanded 50% in the last 12 months. So it's keeping pace, and again, that's the challenge. People have a misperception of that. So I'll go to the next slide, and then I'll come back to...
Just to put into context, Tom,
Sorry.
how many petrol stations are there in the UK?
So there are about 8,500 petrol stations, forecourts. There's about 70,000 fuel pumps. So we've long exceeded the number of fuel pumps. There are a number of EV charging points in the UK is already way above the number of petrol pumps, because there's about 150,000 EV charging points. 100,000 of those are at homes. They're dedicated for electric vehicles. We're not talking about 3-pin sockets here, because if we go into that, we're in billions. So this is just dedicated EV charging points. There's over 100,000 in homes. So if you think about that, we're already way past the petrol pump scenario in terms of numbers. And if you want to look at public charging, is Dom from Nissan still here?
No, go on.
So Dom from Nissan did some good research a couple of years ago, and he worked out that actually we're probably going to over the number of public charging. So forget the home stuff if you think I'm cheating with that. If you look at public charging, the number of public charging points will exceed the number of petrol pumps, not forecourts, pumps, by about 2020. There you go. So this is a shift in type. Now this comes back to Steve's point about different types and speeds and stuff. So I'm afraid the charging point industry was born before I was. So born before I got into EV space. So it came up with these definitions of charging, which aren't my words. So it calls some charging slow, and the best way to think of that is just a little bit faster than a 3-pin plug. You can plug an EV into a 3-pin plug. We don't advise you do it, but you can do it, and that's slow charging. So you'll hear that if you see 3 kilowatt, that's slow charging. Fast charging isn't actually fast, but it's called fast. And it's 7 kilowatts. So if you see 7 kilowatts, or for the electrical engineers among you, 32 amps. And 7 kilowatt is what the industry calls fast charging. To give you an idea of rate of charge, it's about 25 miles of charge per hour. And again, some of you go, bloody hell, I can get thousands of miles of charge of fuel per hour out of a fuel pump. And again, I just come back to that point. Most cars are parked most of the time. So you're not going to be fast charging at 25 miles per hour of charge looking at your watch. It's going to be while you're doing other stuff and going to the gym or whatever. And then the top stuff here on this graph, which has sort of grown in number in the last few years, is what we call rapid charging. So the sort of cheap term everyone always uses is about 80% of charge in half an hour, because that was true. As batteries have got larger, it's got a bit longer, but now we're about to go to a higher rate of charge on rapid charging, so it will kind of come back to earth again and be even truer. It'll probably be 80% in less than half an hour in some cases. So there's been a shift in type, basically, so we've got more rapid chargers out there. Now, if you look sort of behind Ben's head, the split's kind of stabilised over the last 2 years, and everyone said, why has it moved a lot in the last couple of years? And the reason is we've kind of got to a happy medium now, where all the slow chargers that are there are kind of what you need. Long stay airport, car parks, that kind of thing would probably be the right scenario for that. The fast charging is on destinations where you have it anyway, overnight hotels, shopping centres, etc. And then rapid charging is about 20%, 30% of the market, because, again, most of the time you're not going to need a rapid charger. So I'll come back to that in a second, but that's sort of the split we have at the moment.
Isn't there an etiquette thing? As an occasional user of, I suppose, a sporadic user of electric cars, I sometimes find that just exactly when I need something, there'll be a bloke with a plug-in hybrid who doesn't strictly need the charge like I do, who's parked there for half an hour anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there is a raging debate between pure EV drivers and plug-in hybrid drivers on various forums, which I won't entertain for now. But I think if you need to charge, you should always kind of give way to people who need to charge. But I mean, I think that tends to be on rapid chargers, where I don't think many people plug into this grey stuff in the middle really needing a charge. If you're desperate for a charge, you probably want something quick. So you're probably needing this infrastructure up the top here. And plug-in hybrids can't rapid charge anyway, so you're kind of safe with that in some ways.
This is where Tesla wins, isn't it? Because theirs are quick.
Well, they're quick on paper. So Tesla can charge up to 120 kilowatt. We're talking about 50 kilowatt being the current standard for universal rapid charging. So on paper, they're twice as fast. In reality, they end up being about 1.5 times as fast, because you get split loads between the different charge points. You get about 80 kilowatt, 90 kilowatt typically on a Tesla charger. And we'll be rolling out 150 kilowatt next year anyway, so that will kind of overtake Tesla. And that's their struggle, is they then have to either keep up or switch to the charging system that everyone else uses.
Will that be the end of it, or will
The end of Tesla?
you be telling us, you know, in
No,
5 years' time, that'll be 300.
So I'm conscious of time and also boredom factor that I might induce here, but basically current AC charging. So all the dark blue stuff and the grey stuff there, 3 and 7 kilowatt charging is AC charging, alternating current, the same stuff you get at home out of your sockets. So the same way that you have 230 volt electricity at home, you have 230 volt electricity on those charge points. So all those charge points are on standard electricity supplies. Rapid charging needs high voltage. Now, if you're in the army, you'll laugh when I say this because high voltage in the army is like 1,000 volts, but 400 volts is high voltage in this world. So you need high voltage for rapid charging. So 400 volts then requires that to be a transformer, which transforms that AC power up to HV. 150 kilowatt charging, you can still use 400 volts. Once you go faster than 150, you need 800 volts. And that does getting slightly dicey, basically, in terms of power supply. So you have to have way more stuff on the car, which is really expensive, because you have to have a car with an 800 volt system on the car, and engineers that can cope with an 800 volt system when they're coming to repair it. And then you need an electrical supply that can give you an 800 volt supply. And they cost about £1 million.
So 150 is
150,
a practical limit for the time being, is it?
At the moment, 150 is kind of the top of our roadmap to be in marketing speak. So we see 350 kilowatt charging, which is the next interval after that. Don't ask me why there's not like 200, 300, just goes to 350. We see that as being really niche because then you are talking about, 1,000 miles of range in an hour, if you like, or whatever. But actually, the cars that are going to need that, and I'll come on to it in a second, are going to be your performance cars that will pay a premium for it, that want to be zap and go in 3 minutes. It's your Porsche Mission E driver, etc. And that's fine, but you're going to pay more for it. So the question is, do you want to pay more for the premium fuel? So hands up if you use premium unleaded at the moment.
Oh, look at that.
Wrong crowd to ask that question. Anyway, the point is, not all of you did. So not all of you do. So there you go. Right. So. Should have thought about it. I was like, where am I? That usually works at like a finance conference. No, don't spend money on that. Anyway, let me skip forward a few slides because this model might help sort of settle some of that. So if you go forward past this one, Lawrence, sorry, this is boring. Keep clicking. There's like a whole list. This is just where you might find charging points, basically anywhere a car's parked is the conclusion. Next one. Yeah, next one. Right, cool. So. Yes, it stopped. Great. So this is a model that I kind of made to try and get my head around how charging is used, and hopefully it might help you. So electric cars, as per my definition at the top of the thing, have to be charged, which means, one click, please, Lawrence. All EV drivers need to charge, okay? So that's the big circle, is everyone who needs to charge. Okay, next click, Lawrence. So the middle circle, and this isn't to scale or anything, it's just approximate sort of rationale. This is EV drivers who need public charging, right? So there's going to be a proportion who lie outside that circle who don't need public charging, okay? And again, this is the head scratcher mindset shift, which is there are many, many people who will never, in inverted commas, maybe on one road trip to Scotland to see the imaginary granny we've all got up there apparently. Whenever you speak about EVs, someone says, well, I go to Scotland twice a year to visit my grandma. Okay, fine. But there's going to be a portion of people who never need public charging, broadly speaking, and that's that. You then have this inner circle who need rapid charging, which is the fast stuff we have at the moment. And then the next gen super fast stuff, one more click, Lawrence, is that tiny circle. So when we talk about that really, really fast charging and charging in 5 minutes, that's the proportion of journeys and people that are going to have to do that, in my view. Very, very few, very, very less, very, very infrequently, very, very regularly. So that's my model. Next one. If that gets used in future presentations, I'm going to get royalties, I hope. So anyway. This is just a thing about plug-in hybrids that I want people to think when they buy a car. If you care about EVs and care about charging, make sure you ask if the car can rapid charge if you're going to buy an EV, because, again, bluntly, Ben's an expert, Robin's an expert, Steve's an expert. Some dealers aren't experts, so they might tell you it can rapid charge, but just do your homework, because we've had a couple of disappointed drivers. So basically, if you can rapid charge, then you can use every type of infrastructure, and if you can't rapid charge, then you can't use rapid charging.
What's the situation with your car, with a Zoe?
Our range will do both. So we've got some of our range that will go all the way up to the top end rapid charging. We've got some other cars which, exactly as Tom says, and in fact I might steal his slide and redo it myself so I don't have to pay his horrendous royalties. But in exactly the same way, when most of you have seen that Zoe that's outside, it's a B segment hatchback. It's the same kind of size as a Fiesta or a Clio. A lot of those kinds of cars never really go on any of the long distance stuff. They get used fairly intensively day to day to take the kids to school or go shopping or do all those kinds of things. So actually, there isn't any need to ask the customer to pay for the ability to rapid charge that vehicle, because that's not how that vehicle gets used. So we offer people the option between the two.
So that's just a quick question. If you're looking at an EV and you want it to be able to rapid charge, make sure it can. It's not a car that can't, because there are some that can't. So next one. This is a slide of doom. Just one more. Oh, there we go. Right. So this is the one that gets everyone. So this is when people charge cars. This is real data. This is cumulative monthly data, I think based on, I don't know, October last year, but it basically stays the same every month on month. So this is when are people plugged in. Unfortunately, we don't get start and stop charge. That gets a bit complicated. This is when are they plugging in to a charge point. The grey line is home chargers, because we've got 40,000 home charging units out there in the market. And the blue line is public charging. So what you see is, and on the left is number of sessions, so effectively number of cars being plugged in. So between, sort of during the day, public charging, as you can imagine, people drive into London, they drive somewhere that's got a public charging point for them to use, and they plug in at 7 and 8 a.m., and it's there all day, and it's kind of flatlined. You don't really get much activity during the day. Home charging, again, as you can expect, people are unplugging in the morning, and then during the day, and again, there's a bit of an interesting peak in the middle, which I think is sort of second cars and people doing kind of, I don't know, returning cars to home if they're not working or whatever. And then you have the evening peak. And obviously anyone in the room that knows about sort of domestic electricity will know that we already have an evening peak in power in the UK. So, and again, when we're talking about power, if we already have an evening peak, if EVs are going to just load more stuff onto the evening peak, clearly that's not going to be a good thing long term. So we have this peak, it's a problem. It's a very easily solvable problem. Everything that's plugged in there, say everything, I like to exaggerate, 95% of vehicles that plug in then aren't needed again until probably 6, 7 a.m. in the morning. So when they plug in, most of the time on the data we have, they're probably fully charged within an hour and a half, because people don't do that much driving. We know how far people drive in the UK. It's not far, 26 miles a day. So they're fully charged by they plug in at 6 and they're probably fully charged by 8:30. Well, they don't need to be fully charged by 8:30 because they don't need another car for another 11 hours. So all you do is you just push all that charging that way. And you do that through a number of routes. So you incentivize people to charge later. So all these cars are connected, they're very intelligent, so you can just program the car and say, only ever charge between midnight and 7 a.m, please, no problem, the car will do that. You'll have an app that will pop up and say, would you like to charge cheaper overnight? There's a cheaper tariff available. Yeah, no problem, I'll charge overnight at a cheaper tariff. But most of all, you'd incentivize it. If we're asked to do something at a lower cost, we'll do it. So you can incentivize the charging really easily that way. You also have things like variable rate of charging. So rather than a charger working at a constant rate at the moment and fully charging the car within, say, an hour and a half, you'll have chargers that will vary the rate down to a much lower rate of charge, so it will still charge the same amount, just over less time. So it's just sort of flatlining the charge through the evening. But all of that charging can be moved because the cars aren't needed till the morning. So we're going to figure that out without much problem in terms of incentivization.
So the sort of bottom line is that the much vaunted overload of the grid is a phantom thing.
Well, it's a phantom thing if we don't incentivize it. So if we don't do anything, that will be a problem. But as long as we incentivize it, and the good thing is we've got loads of surplus electricity here overnight that we need to use. And we've got EVs that can use it.
Even the reasonably affordable basic cars can already be
they
told
can, absolutely. And there are also programs that, because Tom's absolutely right, there's this huge opportunity there, but actually it's only a huge opportunity if it's made really easy for people to do. You don't want people to have to be programming when the car's going to charge every night or all this sort of thing. So actually there's various programs going on. There's one happening in the Netherlands at the moment where it's just a very simple app where you tell the app that you never want your car to be less than 80% charged when you go to work in the morning. You can set it to 100 if you want. And then that app will then have a look at when the energy is available, but you're also rewarded because it's obviously in the electricity company's benefit to help you charge when they have a surplus of electricity, not when they're short of electricity. So you then get extra money being put into your account. And that's already stuff that's up and running and working and giving people a benefit now.
Because the big win in energy generation is to deliver a more or less flat.
Largely.
And again, you've got them plugged in overnight. You've got the benefit of overnight surplus supply, and if we get to a world of vehicle to grid, which we might discuss, you've got lots of batteries plugged in where the grid's got power that needs to give away or sometimes draw. So you've got demand response there as well. So all I'm saying is that there is an evening peak. It's a problem if we don't do anything, but the industry is doing stuff already, so I don't think it's going to be a problem. And by the way, National Grid agree. So I spent time with National Grid today. their view is, if we incentivise charging, it's not going to be a problem. You know, we've got enough energy long-term to provide EVs with the energy they need, so that's amount of energy, terawatt hours over the year, and we won't have a power issue as long as we incentivise, so it's not going to be an issue. Right, we can move on past that one. Sorry, we're going to skip the next two. Skip that one, skip that one. This one's quite important, and I've cocked it up with that. Right, there we go. Let's give them the game away. If we go down, we'll just do about three more clicks if you can, Laura, thanks. One more, another one, and one more. So, the initial stuff's just metrics. I won't go through that, but it's really hard we always get, well, how much does it cost to charge then? If it is cheap to buy or cheap to run, how much does it cost to charge? It's really hard to make charging an EV cost more than fueling a car. Even if you drive a really, really efficient hybrid at the moment or something, and you think that there's no way your Yaris could get beaten by an EV, it's really, really hard to make it cost more. So because electricity is fundamentally quite cheap, because everything runs on it, schools, hospitals, whatever, it's really hard to make it as expensive as liquid fuel. To get to the price point of liquid fuel, you have to be about 50 pence per kilowatt hour, which is about 4 times your domestic energy rate, and about at least sort of 2.5 plus times as much as public charging at the moment. So the typical cost of an efficient EV per mile is about 2 to 6 pence per mile. So 2 pence, obviously, if you've got a really cheap overnight tariff, for example. And I think a typical cost of a petrol diesel car, just for fuel, this isn't running cost, just fuel cost, about 15 to 20 pence. So this is per mile, so you're basically pocketing, at least 10p every mile. So if you do a 10-mile journey, that's a quid in your pocket, et cetera, et cetera.
But isn't it the case that when this hall full of people have bought an electric car, the government will have missed out on a great deal of petroleum tax and will therefore need to hike the price of electricity?
So I'm going to let Ben answer this after I've answered it, because it'll be interesting if he has a different view. Everyone I speak to in the industry, everyone who's in the automotive industry, and not just in EVs, everyone in the automotive industry, everyone in the energy industry, everyone who I've ever spoken to about this topic agrees that the only way to replace the lost fuel duty that there will inevitably be from the decline in petroleum and diesel sales eventually, and we're talking decades here, we're not talking about tomorrow, is some form of, and I'm sorry if you all gasp, road pricing or mileage-based pricing. Taxing electricity does not work. Because we all use electricity, there's electricity in that projector and the lights, whatever, you can't tax it more than it's already taxed, because hospitals will start closing down, schools will start closing because they can't afford their electric bills. You can't generally tax electricity. So then you turn around and say,
you can't have red electricity and blue electricity.
You can't have, exactly, because you'll have the same situation, you get penalised for red diesel now, and you'll get people just chucking a 3-pin socket through the window to charge their electric car next to the toaster, which ends up with singed plugs and stuff. So it's really hard to you can't tax electricity generally. You can't tax public charging, because if you tax public charging, that previous graph is a problem again, because everyone goes home and charges when they shouldn't be charging.
So let's hear you on that, Ben. Is that?
Well, I mean, as much as I'm very flattered by Tom saying everybody he's ever spoken to has had that opinion, and he thought I might have a different one, I do actually completely agree with him that actually there isn't a practical way to do that. And as somebody with an electric vehicle and a couple of other cars that I drive very infrequently, actually, as much as this might not be a necessarily totally universally accepted thing, actually I would welcome something like road pricing, simply because it stings a little bit to be paying £250 a year to tax a car that I only ever do about 1,000 miles a year in. From that point of view, actually, I think it not only makes more financial sense, but it actually might also be a fairer way of doing the tax
Presumably, isn't it also the case that these cars are much more connected than they used to be, so road pricing paraphernalia would be easier to include in the cars?
So all the work for road pricing was done by the previous government. So when George Osborne was Chancellor, there was a full detailed technical report about how you would introduce road pricing in the UK. It was done, it just never got implemented. And if you think about it, your mileage is digitally recorded at MOT time. So if you give me any of your registration numbers, I will automatically be able to find out when your car was last MOT'd, where it was last MOT'd, and what the mileage was. So there's already a digital record of your mileage history. Now, the only reason why you couldn't apply a tax-based system to that is if you say, well, you might get mileage adjustment. But of course you might get mileage adjustment. Mileage adjustment happens now illegally, and the government should crack down on it, but that's not a reason not to do it. Okay, next one's quite a key one, because this is another challenge we get. So you're basically just driving a coal-powered car because you get your electricity from coal. So EVs, as I said at the top, it's about plug-in vehicles that can do proper zero-emission mileage. So if that's true, then they're all about delivering zero-emission mileage. And to get zero-emission mileage, BEVs, and excuse the analogy, A BEV is, in the industry terminology, is a battery electric vehicle, which is another way of describing a pure electric car. So an electric car's own electric. It's not plug-in
Like the
hybrid.
three out there.
Yeah. So they always deliver zero emission mileage at the tailpipe. So yeah, basically, you'll always get zero emission mileage, which is great. Plug-in hybrids and range extenders can deliver, if they're charged properly, can deliver zero emission mileage. But the really important thing I'd say is, this is a couple of quotes from a think tank called Transport and Environment based in Belgium, or T&E as they're known. Now, Transport and Environment are vociferously, what's the best word I can use without pissing them off? Slightly anti-car industry. They are very vocal about the car industry not doing a good enough job. So if T&E say something's okay, it probably is, because they're really big critics. So what they say is, by 2030, I mean, at the moment, you might have, based on where EVs are made, etc., you might have manufacturing emissions that are slightly higher than the ICEs. Again, economies of scale argument. The only way I've ever worked this out, by the way, the only study I saw from MIT in the States was that the only way they could prove even today that that was true was they took a Tesla and a Mitsubishi Mirage, if anyone knows what that is. And they said Mitsubishi Mirage is cleaner to make in terms of overall life cycle CO2 than a Tesla. And I was, not quite comparable vehicles.
No.
Sorry for anyone who drives a Mitsubishi Mirage. But anyway, so the T&E is saying they'll be cleaner overall. And the next one is that they are cleaner even if they're powered off coal. So if you charge an EV, so if I plug my electric car and charge it on a diesel generator, as long as it's with other EVs charging a diesel generator, I'm probably still doing cleaner well-to-wheel mileage than a petrol or diesel car.
Elon says this, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's still cleaner.
He's a great believer.
So, and everyone says our grid's coal-powered and everything else. There's a baseline of coal that's typically needed overnight, typically because all the expensive electricity can't come on. Well, energy storage will solve that probably. Even in Poland, and that's a really, really dirty grid, it's still cleaner.
I think the other point I'd make, as I see you flipping over the thing, the other point I'd make on this is that when you buy an internal combustion car, as that gets older, bits of it wear, so it actually starts to pollute more than when you first got it. With an electric vehicle, we all know that gets its electricity from the grid. We all also know that the government has set some fairly stringent targets to the electricity industry to clean its act up as well. So actually, if you buy an electric vehicle, what you'll find is going forward, you, as a customer, get a free upgrade, and your vehicle will be polluting even less in the future than it is now. From the calculations that I do, and there's all sorts of geeky apps that you can see, which show you what the current CO2 production from the UK grid is. And even on the worst day I've ever seen it, the equivalent CO2 from a Zoe versus an equivalent diesel Fiesta, and obviously diesel is lower CO2 than petrol, but even then, it was at around 40% of what the Fiesta would have been at like for like. And that was on the dirtiest day I've ever seen. So actually, the numbers really do speak for themselves.
And the energy industry has done more. I mean, the car industry, actually, we're not great at reducing carbon in the car industry. In fact, the carbon is actually going up slightly at the moment. But the road transport sector has not really done much to reduce its emissions at all. I talked about legally binding emissions targets earlier. The energy industry has done phenomenal work. The energy industry has decarbonised at an astonishing rate. I mean, they need medals because there's so much renewable now. We've had days now in the UK where we haven't used any coal. We've had days where more than 50% of our power has come from renewables. So, the transition is happening, and all I'll say is, we've been acquired by BP. In 1994, BP was the world's largest solar company, in 1994. 18 years ago, BP changed their descriptor to beyond petroleum. So 20 years ago, BP was thinking beyond petroleum already. So that sort of gives you a view. So
You've acquired the party line very quickly.
I have. I'm a PR guy, Steve. I'm a PR guy.
Could I just? I'm conscious that we should get to some of the questions.
I've got two more, but that's it.
Okay, but let's crack on. Yeah.
I won't go through every single line on these. We'll skip through the next. That's why it's important. That's our legally binding targets. That's fine. I've said all that already. If we did about four of these, all I'll say on here is you might have also heard the myth that electric vehicle residual values are really low. So if you buy one and then try and sell it again, you'll get absolutely hit on residual value. It's a complete fallacy. Sorry, they've all gone skew. Complete fallacy. There are some models in the market where you don't necessarily buy batteries outright, etc., where from a used perspective, it can, for dealers who don't like that kind of thing, it can skew values. But broadly speaking, residual values are great. So this is a Renault Zoe here. This is a battery-inclusive model up here. You can't buy one for less than £9,500, and I've tried. And they sell within hours of going on sale. It's bizarre,
Really?
you know. Yeah. The
Well,
fastest selling car in last month.
Exactly. So in the used car market last month, and you know, I can proudly sit here and say it with my diamond on my lapel, but Zoe was the #1 fastest selling car in the used market through the month of August, as tracked by Auto Trader. And actually, while I'm very proud of that because I'm Renault, actually for me the more significant point in there is that's the first time that a pure electric vehicle has been fastest selling car. And where you hear these things about residual values, that can only be good news for residual values for the market as a whole, because that shows how much demand there is for these cars and how people are actually considering them. And you know, for me, I think that that's where this starts to be
And actually, when the
pays
new
out.
Give us a little burst about, because you offer both contracts so the buyer doesn't have to own the battery. But tell us about the advantages and disadvantages quickly, if you
Okay,
can, of
yeah,
that.
yeah, we can do
but
that very
also,
quickly.
can you gentlemen reflect on battery life? Because several people have asked, or you've both been asked already outside,
Yeah.
how long these batteries last.
I think the battery life question is a brilliant one because certainly when you talk to people about electric vehicles, they always think that the first question that you're going to be asked is about range. In my experience, it very rarely is. It's about how long the battery is going to last. And that's quite normal because everybody's had a phone. Everybody knows how those batteries are degraded over time. So in short, the general view, and it's probably a view that's also held by Renault, is that a battery will normally have a useful life of around 8 to 10 years, possibly even longer. That can be affected by various different circumstances, i.e. how it's used, the environment around it, that kind of thing. You know, a battery that's frequently rapid charged in the south of Spain will not last quite as long as one which is run by, you know, somebody who's just trundling to and from, trundling to and from work. But in general, about 8 to 10 years, and that's an absolute minimum. And at the end of that 8 to 10 years, we're not then saying that this is a battery that doesn't work at all. It still does have some life in it, so it still might offer 60, 70% of the original capacity. So you're not stranded by the side of the road, but it's just degraded over time. On the point on battery lease versus full purchase, there are a few people in here who we've already discussed this with, but in short, Renault offer 2 ways of purchasing the vehicle, either outright, as you would with any other vehicle. So you buy the battery as part of that. So that's great for people who are quite confident with the technology, really happy that they're confident in what we say about the battery. And so they can just buy that in the same way as they would any other car. For people who are a little bit more nervous about the longevity of the technology or who are a little bit more financially constrained, we do battery lease, which means you buy the vehicle and then you lease the battery from us. But the key point behind that is that not only does that bring the price of the vehicle down, it also means that because you don't own the battery, it's not your responsibility. So with that, we're able to then put in a repair or replace guarantee that if that battery ever drops below 75% of its original capacity, it's repaired or replaced free of charge to you. So really, neither of those are any form of sales pitch. It's just to say there are options out there for people. So for people who are a bit nervous about the technology, there are things that can help. For people who are completely confident with the technology, there are also things that can help.
Where would you put your own money?
Personally, I would buy a battery lease vehicle. Simply because I don't particularly want to pay for a depreciating asset put into a horrible finance kind of way. But yeah, I would personally be buying a battery lease vehicle.
Interesting.
But you know, I am not necessarily representative of the market. There are plenty of people who like to buy something outright.
But you've got a grip on the subject, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I would like to think so. There's many who disagree.
Yeah, maybe it's the first time you better get disagree. So I'd sink it into a battery outright vehicle. I'm not saying necessarily is that whatever vehicle I'd buy, I'd probably buy a battery inclusive. I mean, our very glib line on this is the battery is going to outlast the cars. That's the simple thing we say, which is easy line to throw out there, but it genuinely is true. All the evidence shows that the batteries are lasting longer than the rest of the car. So you'll start seeing rust patches indoors probably before the battery starts degrading.
I can remember trying to do some research into the decline of Prius batteries, and I asked a number of Toyota dealers, and they said, "Oh, we haven't had any."
Well, the standard hybrid batteries are actually different because the different technology. So a standard hybrid battery is designed to be charged and discharged really, really fast at a really, really high rate. So you whack the power into a hybrid. This is a standard hybrid, so not the stuff we talked about tonight. Whack the power in, whack the power out all the time, up and down, up and down. So it's getting discharged and charged really sharply on a standard hybrid like a Prius. If you scroll to Auto Trader and go through 100,000 mile plus Lexus and Priuses, you quite often see battery needs replacing. scroll through 100,000 mile plus EVs, you never see that because they last longer because they're charged gently, they're discharged gently, et cetera, et cetera.
Interesting.
So actually, and they're not usually lithium ion, they're usually nickel, cadmium, and stuff like that. So the different technologies. There's companies out there that have done 150, 200,000 miles, pure electric cars, rapid charging every day, and the cars are still 85, 90% of their original range. And I reckon if you did 200,000 miles in a diesel, it would probably only give you 80% of its original MPG. So
Yeah.
6 to 1, right?
Where are we?
So I'm going to leave a slide up, which is a couple of slides time. So skip the next one, Lawrence, if that's all right. Skip the next one, because it's going to cover this. Skip the next one. Saving costs, Ben's already mentioned it, but it's about a third you save on servicing overall. Next one. Next one. Don't worry about this. You can ask me all this. Next one. And right, this is the slide I'm going to pause. So yeah, one more and one more. So I'll just talk this through, and then we'll just maybe leave this as a backdrop, which is quite nice. But this is my thing to show you where we were 5 years ago, where we are today, and where we think we'll be in 5 years. So the left-hand side is factual, middle one's factual. This is speculation, but I think it's fair speculation. So we've gone from that sort of 4,000 EVs on the road 5 years ago to, this was actually done some well ago, so we're over 170,000 now. That shows you how pace of change, right? 1 in 50 new cars, so yeah, 2 plus 3% of the market. We had a little wobble upward wobble, I should say, in last month, where we had 4.2% of sales, but I think that was probably more to do with other stuff going on in the market. About 50 different models to choose from. But in 5 years, we think, 1 in 10 new cars will be plug-in electric of some kind. The biggest thing that will drive that is choice. You have a choice of 200 cars. If you can't choose from 200 cars, probably something wrong with you. And most importantly, from us, from Chargemaster's point of view, the infrastructure is going to grow to keep up. So that's my piece, and I've gone way too long, but it's tricky to rattle through in that time.
I think you gentlemen have established what I said at the beginning, that you are indeed experts. But what I want to do is, do you want to pause for a clap, and then we'll ask them questions?
I have to declare an interest because I'm associated with a River Simple group who are developing a fuel cell car. And we have the feeling that battery technology in vehicles is the bridge technology to fuel cells ultimately, because you get a nicer vehicle. But I think that there's still potentially an issue with the charging substations when the numbers of EVs become really substantial, and your graph is showing, a million users. There are certainly places in the US where the take-up of electric vehicles, which represented about 10% of the local population, already came to the limit of the electricity substations that they have. And what does that mean about the sort of investment that's going to be necessary in the whole electrical infrastructure in order to be able to power battery EVs, not necessarily the fuel cells, of course. So what would you have to say on that?
I'm not going to profess to give numbers of millions or billions or whatever. One thing I'll be very clear about, and I'm not shying away from it, is the UK is split up with distribution network operators. And sorry, again, some of you know all of that already, but the responsibility of a distribution network operator, you have the transmission network from National Grid, and then you have distribution networks run by private companies that make largely billion-pound profits. Their raison d'etre is to maintain the integrity of the networks. Okay, so their number one reason to exist is to maintain the integrity of our networks. Whatever we choose as consumers to do, whatever developments happen in the world, their number one reason is to maintain the network integrity. So my view is that is their job. And I'm not passing the buck in that sense, but they're working with the industry to do that. Now, they will have to invest large sums to upgrade certain areas of the grid to cope, mostly local substations for local areas, particular streets, particular roads, etc. And they've already identified them. Their groundwork is largely done because they know this is coming, so they've worked out those the differentials and the.
Making the right noises,
yeah, I think they're reluctant participants at this point. Most of them, they know it's coming, but they're just dragging their feet a bit because they don't want to dip into their £1 billion profit they made last year. But to make a profit, you probably need to invest it.
Right, we've got another question right at the back of the hall here.
Thank you. Bearing in mind these batteries are lithium-based, if one of the vehicles was in a real big smash-up, what would be the hazard, and what sort of extinguishers use if there was a fire resulting?
I can answer that one. So actually, what happens is, if it's in a smash, not very much happens. The battery is intrinsically fairly safe. The method for putting out the fire is to flood it with gallons of water to keep it cool. So that's what the fire brigade are briefed with. But I would go back, I suppose, to the point that actually, though you're right to ask the question, but it's a question that we're all sort of fairly, comes to mind fairly easily because we're used to driving around in vehicles which have a tank of flammable liquid in them. And actually, a battery is a far more stable thing than a tank of liquid. So I'm absolutely not saying that, this will never happen. Plainly, there have been cases of electric vehicles catching fire. But when you take into account the number of electric vehicles that are out there on the road and the number of those cases versus the number of fires that you see in internal combustion vehicles, actually the two are on vastly different planes. So there is all sorts of training that is actually undertaken in all countries. We've done it already here, but with the fire brigade to help them work out what to do within accident scenarios. And actually, it's rather more about making sure that they know what they can cut through and what they can't cut through. We're talking about fairly high tension cables, things like that. And so it's just about making sure that the right people know what to do in those kinds of situations to make sure that everybody's completely safe. But yeah, the key point there is that actually intrinsically a battery is a much more stable thing than a...
10 gallons of...
Inflammable, yeah.
So despite 2.5 million new cars on the road, average age of a car is 8 years. How do we get to a tipping point where EV is going to be more than ICE, bearing in mind that most of us probably have classic cars in this room as well?
Absolutely. And I think that the classic cars, and as an enthusiastic classic car owner, some people, a bit like Tom was saying about people disagreeing on the definition of a classic car, as an owner of an MG Maestro, that isn't always taken as a classic car. But
Is it turbo?
no, 2-litre FI. Don't want to mess around with too much power, do I? So I think that there's sort of a couple of separate things there. For me, the classic car element of it actually is one of the reasons that I love driving an EV, because actually, if it weren't for driving an EV, I would only have one classic car, whereas because I have an EV, I can afford two. That's the first bit to it. The second one, coming to the tipping point, is really the elephant that nobody's really spoken about yet, which is the cost of the vehicles. The two big questions that you first get asked generally when you're talking to people is how long is the battery going to last and how much is the vehicle? And really the key to that second point is about reaching a scale of production. At the moment, they're relatively small scale production. The volumes are relatively small. We've just invested €1 billion, and that has just gone to production facilities. That hasn't gone into vehicle development. That hasn't gone into design. That's purely gone to the factories to make them ramp up to help produce more of these things. And of course, the more people who buy them, the more we produce. Then that means that then the cost of production comes down and we get to a point of cost parity. Tom was showing earlier on, sort of in 2 or 3 years' time, getting to a state where we're much closer to the cost of a typical internal combustion vehicle. And I think that that's the point where actually we will then start to see the real shift go forward. The curves that we've seen here are often referred to hockey stick because that's the kind of shape that they are. And I think that at the moment we're just at the bottom of that hockey stick. And with the progress that's being made in technology, but chiefly in cost, that's where we will start to see that real acceleration as well.
Parity is sort of forecast for early 20s, is it?
Yeah.
Yes, I think, yeah. And just very briefly, I mean, totally agree. And I think that, most people are looking at sort of 50% plus of new car sales being plug-in of some kind by something like 2030-ish is sort of 50% plus, and it's going to happen quite quickly. And to echo Ben's point, by the way, and as someone that absolutely loves cars, please if we're going to get to a point, and I'm probably not live to see it, but please let the last drop of petroleum-based fuel be used in a V8 Morgan rather than some E-segment diesel saloon, right? Please let that be the case. And if you drive an EV, you preserve all the fuel for the classics, right?
Interestingly, I was talking to the technical director of McLaren, and he says that there's a move to formulate non-carbon explosive fuel, and he feels that the day may come when if people are prepared to pay enough, sustainable fuels will come on the market.
Got another question, and I've lost track of who wanted there.
Yes, I haven't got an interest in electric cars at all or anything, but a couple of months ago I was in a car park and saw one of these charging points for the first time, never having seen one before. So curiosity, I had to go and have a look at it. And the thing that really surprised me was the warnings on it, the list of warnings. Now, I don't know if this is typical or just this particular charging point, but the list, there must have been about a dozen do not use if situations. One was if you've got a pacemaker, and the other was if there's a thunderstorm. And I thought, is this general or just this car park charging point?
So I really hope it wasn't one of ours. No, I mean, generally speaking, if the charging points I showed there, if you opened up the flap on them and stuck your finger in, nothing would happen. I mean, this actually really annoyed, this actually caused us a really big headache. The worst thing recently that happened to one of our charging points that actually disabled it and was a genuine problem was someone in Scotland somewhere decided to put a cream egg in one of the charging sockets. And it ruined the charge point. We spent like £1,000 repairing it. But no, they're very, very safe. It's very, very safe to do.
I have charging points in London and at work and in where I live in Gloucestershire, and they're foolproof. You really, I can't imagine what kind of a mug you'd have to be not to misuse them, short of putting cream eggs in them or any other.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have a Renault Twizy, and for the last 2 years it's been used every day into Guildford and back, 10,500 miles, and that's been charged twice at a public charging station. It was Chargemaster, and the rate was pretty good value. Seeing as you've been bought by BP, are they sufficiently beyond petroleum not to start ramping up the cost of your charging to replace lost revenue through lack of petrol and diesel sales?
So, I mean, this is a very specific question. I've got to be slightly careful how I answer from a legal and competition compliance thing and everything else. But I'll get accused of collusion or whatever, market dominance or something. Right, all I'll say is this. The strength that we have as Chargemaster is that we have a very, very well-utilised network, okay? So we have 45,000 customers using our network all across the UK. A lot of other networks that have sprung up with high-priced charging points, 35p per kilowatt hour and so on, I don't see them being used much. So our biggest strength is that we're used a lot, and there is a recognition that we want to keep that way. So it is well understood in the market, I would argue, that if you, as I said earlier, there's no point in trying to make up the shortfall. You've got to go, we're going to go down a different route. So for BP forecourts or any other forecourt, frankly, and again, this is common knowledge, I think, the vast majority of both, certainly profit, does not come from the black stuff you put in the car. It comes from the brown stuff that you get out of the machine in the form of a latte or a cappuccino. That's at least 3 petrol retailers publicly have said their black gold is not oil, it's coffee.
Is there a big battle already between charging point brands? Is it a dog-eat-dog business or?
I don't. I'm not sure.
Or are you having the best of it?
Well, I mean, we don't see. I guess we're at a different end of the market. I mean, it's a very strange market because it's only sort of 10 years old. We've got a certain market share which is quite strong. There's sort of others scrapping over as a smaller percentage. There's some issues in the market, I would say, but it's very healthy in terms of competition and growth. Certainly, yeah.
Another question at the back here. I'll come to you.
There's a few up
Sound
here,
a bit
Steve.
headmasterish, don't I? But there you go.
I'm a keen electric car driver. We have 2 EVs in the family, and they are great. We've been using them for years. And as the technology is moving on, one of the questions was about loading up the grid. We're seeing now the technology that would allow to do vehicle to grid. Do you have anything to say on that as moving forward with that? Because obviously that would help get more EVs out there without overloading the grid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can start, and then I'm sure that Tom has a view on it as well.
Just define vehicle to
Yeah,
grid.
sure. So all of the stuff that we've talked about here has been the energy travelling in one direction. So it's going from the grid into the car then drives around. There are also projects out there where effectively, if you imagine the car is not really just a car, it's a battery on wheels. So actually, when the grid has a surplus of electricity, it then sends that to all the cars. When the grid then is under stress, the cars can then feed that electricity back onto the grid. So the electricity is feeding both ways. Now, there are various advantages to that, and there are some fairly big economic benefits to customers doing that. So, and in fact, social benefits as well. So, for example, after the Fukushima disaster in Japan, and this is the example that often gets used, they used a fleet of Nissan Leafs, which were vehicle-to-grid enabled. So in that area, none of the residents had power. So they could drive their cars to the local town, which did have power, charge their cars. When they got home, the cars could then do the basics for their house, so keep the fridge running, you know, do coffee, that kind of thing. So a really great social kind of benefit. The downside at the moment to vehicle-to-grid is it's actually quite expensive to integrate into your home system. You know, your house is designed to have electricity come into it in one point, and that point is the mains. So having another point put in there where the house might be taking a varying amount of power at different times of the day into different parts of its system is actually fairly expensive to integrate into it. So although there are some fairly nice looking sums that you can do which shows benefits to your pocket, the problem is they have to be offset against quite a high investment in the unit to allow you to do that. So I think that from my...
New house build in future.
Completely, you could have things like new house build in future. You've got different versions of vehicle-to-grid. You know, all of the vehicle-to-grid at the moment is DC, which your house is not really ready set up to do. But there are various companies looking at AC vehicle-to-grid to help with that. So for the short term, sorry, we'll come back to you, but for the short term, it's probably more about grid load management and smart charging, which is what Tom was talking about. In the longer term, there's definitely a role to play for things like vehicle-to-grid.
Thank you very much. First question, Tom, really, you talked about the government's incentives. I'm interested to understand, given what you said about the number of charging points already and the fact that public charging is probably not much used, why is it that forecourts across the country or large forecourts are all being mandated to install charging? And the secondary, which I don't think you've touched on at all, is some of the innovative ideas about charging without wires, either static or picking up through pads while you're on motorways, for example.
Really quickly on the public charging is fairly well used to what it needs to be. So, I mean, to give you an example, we power about 3,000 public charging sessions a day. Concurrently at any one point, out of our network of 6,500, currently there's about 1,300 maximum being used at any one time, so there's always about 70% capacity. That seems inefficient, but the capacity is important to be there. I can't answer why the government's mandating it. I do think it's possibly worthwhile in terms of spreading particularly the higher powered charging out there. I can't comment as to why they pick large forecourts and fuel retailers, I don't know, but I do think it's a good idea. Bluntly, I think it's a good idea. So I've been to Petrol Retailers Association conferences and forecourt conferences, and the one thing they always say to me is, well, yeah, we really need to work out a way of getting people to spend more time on our forecourts so they come in the shop and spend more money. Any ideas? And I go, yeah, I've got one, yeah. How about a 10-minute rapid charge rather than a 3-minute fill? So actually, it works really well economically for them. Second point about wireless charging, I did skip over it, but we are a licensee for a wireless charging technology from Qualcomm. Wireless charging for us is as the market drives wireless charging from the manufacturer's side, it may well happen, but there's not, at the moment, you know, we work with every major global OEM, we work with all the kind of technology providers. There doesn't seem to be that desire from the manufacturer to go towards wireless charging at the moment, because mainly of reasons of weight and things like that. It's not so much the efficiency, because the efficiencies are pretty similar to cable.
The tech's there, isn't it?
Yeah, the efficiency of wireless charging is basically exactly the same as the efficiency of a cable. It's like 96 versus 94. It's so equivalent. When we speak to OEMs, it's weight. They don't want the 40 kilos or whatever they need to add for the receiver on the car. So actually more of them are looking at things like robotic charging arms, which sound really high tech, but actually, you know, you've got proximity sensors in parking sensors. You just have to figure out where the charge port is.
So it's not about irradiating the cat under your car.
Well, no, that's a high. Yeah, I mean, more risk of that. But yeah.
Of course, the other challenge with it is that all cars would have to have their charging pad in the same place. So you then also need some
with all the same standards, and you'd have to if you had a.
And they have to be accurate. I went to your place one time, and I found it crap driver. I found it difficult to position the car precisely.
Okay,
Steve,
we've got one
there's a
more
few
here,
up here.
and then a gentleman down there. So
Yeah.
Yeah, completely different question, really. We're told that obviously the technology in electric vehicles is completely different to a conventional vehicle, gives the opportunity to relocate the main parts like an engine and stuff like that, which in theory should free up design to create much more interesting vehicles or just different vehicles. So far, they're pretty conventional. I mean, the three out there are just standard hatchbacks. Do you think that's due to the consumer and market conservatism of the market, or is it to do with how much it costs to change the structure of a vehicle, or what? Do you think that's going to happen?
Speaking on behalf of the manufacturer, actually the key thing, and we've already talked about the tipping point earlier on, the key thing is that we need to make these vehicles that intrinsically people want to buy. And you're absolutely right, it does open up the sphere much more on what you can do with a car. And there have been some fairly adventurous vehicles out, things like Tom's i3, that's a carbon shell, the doors open differently, the interior layout is slightly different. But actually what I'd come back to is that the best-selling EVs are the Nissan Leaf, the Renault Zoe, and the Tesla Model S, all of them being quite conventional-looking cars, rather than one of the ones that looks a bit more like a spaceship that's landed on your drive. And I was explaining to a few of the people who came out in the Zoe with me, certainly the Renault view is that if people are being asked to make a big change to the way they're thinking about their car, how they're driving, all the rest of it, actually there's no reason to ask them to make another change and have to explain to their neighbours why they have something that looks really strange on the driveway as well. That said, for future vehicles, there are all kinds of opportunities that it opens up in terms of packaging and that sort of thing. Again, if I have a look, even at the Kona outside, fantastic vehicle, and you look at how that's packaged, you look at how the center console is, where you've got lots more storage in it, you look at the size of the boot, you look at how much space there is for people in there. All of that is possible because of how that vehicle is laid out. So for me, I think it's intrinsic benefits which build on one another, which will probably end up that in 10 years' time, new vehicles being launched we would not recognise today. But actually, it needs to be something which isn't just an overnight switch, because that runs the risk of alienating people.
The advances are actually there, aren't they? It's just that you don't want to frighten people by aggregating them all.
Yeah.
Couple more questions. Maybe three.
It's been very interesting, but we've been talking all about the car. And I would imagine, I'd have to really imagine very, very hard for me to buy an electric car. But if I did, I'm going down the motorway surrounded by whacking great big vehicles called diesels, chucking out whatever. And I might think to myself, this is futile. What am I doing? So my question really is, do either of you know what advances are being made with the lorry, which is the real polluter?
Okay, this is, and I've said there's, ironically, a gentleman here from BP who used to do advanced fuel, which is fantastic that we met, and bizarrely we sat next to each other. I'm not anti-hydrogen, but I do not, and again, we differ on this, I don't see hydrogen as, or pure EVs as being a stepping stone. Because I think by the time, hydrogen's currently playing catch up with the electric car, not follow me, basically. Hydrogen is behind the electric car development. By the time hydrogen's got to where EVs are today, in terms of usability, daily usage, price, etc., EVs will be that much further on that hydrogen will always be, in my mind, again, it's a personal view. So passenger cars, I don't see it. I do, however, see hydrogen working incredibly well in heavier vehicles. So I think there is probably more value in pursuing hydrogen in heavier vehicles than there is electrification. I know there's electrification going on out there for big trucks, and Elon Musk is doing it, and whoever else. It's I'm an EV guy. It's really hard to do. The energy density, et cetera, it's really hard to do a pure electric EV. What you can do is cool stuff like electrify the trailers to reduce load and actually have less strain on the truck. So someone did that recently with a caravan in a show in Germany. They were showing off an electrically assisted caravan with an e-axle, an i3. So the car that would typically not be able to tow that caravan could tow it because it was electrically assisted in a trailer. So you might get that. So I think probably my bet would be hydrogen for heavy vehicles. I think you're much harder to electrify a really heavy truck.
But in the meantime, there are some
fantastic advances in after treatments as well.
Yeah.
We gave an award recently to some guys from Loughborough University who have come up with an amazing...
Modern diesel trucks, just to say, are so much cleaner than they used to be. It's to the extent where the diesel-powered refrigeration unit on a refrigerated truck, the diesel-powered refrigeration unit now is dirtier than the exhaust pipe of the truck.
Okay, I've got one more question at the front here.
Thank you, Guy. Very interesting, guys. It's been a very interesting talk. Silly question, really, but I remember some months ago reading a newspaper article about the government going to legislate to make electric cars noisy. I very nearly got run over by an i3 some weeks ago. What's the situation? I haven't heard or read anything about it since.
So from our point of view, one of the things that Zoe features as standard is what we call ZE voice. So at speeds up to 18 miles an hour, it makes this noise to warn pedestrians that it's around. The Kona does something very, very similar. Fantastic innovations, fantastic things there. We've done a bit of work with Guide Dogs for the Blind with it. Certainly when the car was being originally designed, it was Guide Dogs in Austria for some reason. I don't know why. We're a French company working with Guide Dogs in Austria. But these are all things that you're absolutely right. They need to be taken into account. But one of the questions we quite frequently get asked is, why doesn't it just make the noise of some sort of V12? And the answer to that is actually because one of the key benefits of EVs is that actually they are quite quiet. And so actually it does make towns and cities a nicer place to be. So there's not a lot of point in replacing real V12s with synthesized V12s in a town.
I think your problem is one that I've noted a few times, which is there's no announcement, is there? You know, if you're in a supermarket car park, you're walking along behind a bunch of cars, it goes vroom, and you know that something. So what you kind of need is just something that says, I am now in action. You don't necessarily need a loud noise, it seems to me.
Yeah. And actually even a light.
Yeah. Even a light, yeah.
Yeah. No, they have that about to move. They've got a beacon flash.
Yeah.
I mean, very quickly, Steve, sorry. I mean, one thing I would say is, if you think about it, the point at which you need an EV to be announcing itself or to be audible is low speed. And actually, at low speed, a V12 Ferrari isn't making that much noise, unless you're in Knightsbridge with Wally at the traffic lights. But you know, the point is, so actually the noise that most of these EVs do make, and they are making already, is a kind of a low-speed hum. And actually, it's kind of similar to the low-speed hum that you would get from a slow-moving internal combustion engine. So I think there's a bit more pedestrian awareness to do, but also, we need to kind of work on those noises a little bit.
To me, it's that announcement.
Yeah. I agree with you. That caught me out.
Yeah.
But again, I think the other thing to just bear in mind is that we all have multiple years of experience of that being our key, of that startup. Actually, as we get more used to these vehicles being out there, it's a different sound, but it's something else that we get used to.
I'm going to take one more question, but before that, Steve, we had a chat earlier on that we're going to rerun this in a year's time, aren't we?
Yeah.
And we'd like you two guys to come back and see where we are and what has progressed from those figures that you've got now. So I'd look forward to that.
Yeah.
So one last question, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. It's a question for Ben, actually. Looking at the map of brands, the new vehicles that are coming on stream, very established brands. I mean, Renault, over 100 years in the business. We're talking about new technology, new innovation. Is there going to be appetite for completely new brands? I imagine if you stop the average person walking in the street, says, name me an electric car brand, Tesla is going to be front of mind. It's right up there. And we look at these great new innovations, but very, very old brands, over 100 years. Do you anticipate that your customers are going to be loyal to you, or will they say, actually, time's up, I'm quite interested in trying something completely new? And I'm thinking of Dyson, James Dyson, there's rumoured to be working on a car. I'm sure there's a great appetite for millennials to switch to a Samsung or even an Apple if they choose to get into that market. They're leading in mobile. Why not put the wheels onto the mobile? The cars are starting to sound like laptops. So do you see challenges coming from disruptive brands that are going to completely change the whole motoring landscape?
I absolutely do, yeah, absolutely. But I think that there's place for both. If you look at Tesla, they have had the first mover advantage. They've been first to the market. They've got some fantastic products out there. They have got their own dedicated infrastructure. They've got all of these things which they have this kind of maverick figure at the head, so they have this kind of almost cult around them as well. However, and they've been very successful, don't get me wrong. They've got a lot of cars out on the road. Maybe not quite so many dollars in the bank, but lots of cars out there on the road. But actually, in talking to people, I talk to just as many people who say, I'd really love a Tesla, as I do who will say things like, I really can't wait until Jaguar or Porsche or Mercedes bring out an electric vehicle. You know, it's fantastic to have these newcomers coming onto the market because they do open things up, they do disrupt things, they do show what's possible, they do encourage everybody else to go that little bit further. But I suppose if I reversed it and I said, right, today I'm here, I've got a world first announcement, Renault are going to start building vacuum cleaners. Yeah, you know, some people in here might be interested, but most people would probably still stick with their Dyson. And so I think that's where it is. Certainly things like Google and that kind of thing, again, personal view, and I certainly don't work in engineering or purchasing, but for me, the benefits of Google and all of their self-driving technology is if I was them, I'd be then trying to sell that technology to the existing manufacturers because the car industry is a very cash-hungry one with very low margins and very high cost to entry. I was talking about the 1 billion euros that we've put in just to improve production on 3 of our models. You know, that gives an idea of the scale of the finances we're talking about. So actually, for companies like that, there are probably more efficient ways that they can get their expertise out there. And so for me, I see it more as a partnership maybe for some of those than direct competition.
Totally agree. I think there might be some new brands, but I think it'll be very, very niche. I think people like Dyson, it'll be a volume brand. Tesla's done incredibly well, but as a company that owns 3 Teslas, they also have some serious drawbacks on things like reliability. Personally, personal view, alert, I'd be surprised if Tesla's still making cars in 10 years' time. I think, Elon Musk is getting bored, as per his media stuff recently. And I think there's far more money to be made for Tesla in energy storage, solar and stuff like that. So I think actually the big brands will do it, because frankly, making cars is really, really hard. And if Apple and Samsung think they've seen high regulation, complex regulation in making phones, wait till they start making cars. One quick question, if I may. Who owns the Carver 1?
Hey.
Why does that now not surprise me now you've said that? Awesome, I love it. Thank you. Sorry.
Well, last comment on that, on the thing, my own road testing background tells me that in the end, people care about the quality of the product in the end. They're very attracted by brands, but honestly, the Golf sells, the Golf will always sell because it is such a wonderful car. It's just done better than other stuff in the market. And you know, when it comes time to replace the Golf, they get the best people in the entire organisation to replace the Golf. That's why it's about quality of product.
I was going to ask you to close the evening, but you've done.
No, well, can I just say,
Yeah, I'd like you to.
it's really encouraging to see so many of you so interested in modern technology. One of the things that dogs organisations like this is that you know, some of us are thought to be only interested in ancient history. We can all see that your focus is on the future, and I think that is great for us all, and I congratulate you on it, and thanks very much for being so interested.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.